Alright guys, this is technically going to be part 1 of period 5 of the review, but I've got a couple of things from period 4 yet to put in, so it's going to kind of bleed together here. But when we left off last time, we were talking about the cult of domesticity and Republican motherhood, and we'll continue on with the changing roles of women and some of the results that come out of it. So very briefly, the changing role of women. There's a women's movement during this time period as well, and it's going to tie into a couple of things. Number one, it's going to have to do with suffrage, obviously, and remember suffrage means voting rights, so voting for women. It's also going to have to do with legal and educational rights. In other words, bringing women up to the level of men in a way that they haven't seen before. Now, one of the key characteristics of the women's movement at this point is its tie-in with other movements that are going on. You could kind of call this the age of reform movements, but you've got abolition being linked in with it. You've also got temperance. Now, abolition is more important when it comes to the women's movement because the hopes were as African Americans gained rights both before and after the Civil War. As changes began to happen with African Americans, women were hoping those changes would go over to them as well. Now, the women's movement kind of comes to a head during this period. It was called the Seneca Falls Convention, which was a group of women that got together to voice some of these problems and concerns and hopes that they had as far as the way the country treated them. The two leaders you need to associate with this are Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott. And the big thing that comes out of it is the Declaration of Sentiments and Resolutions, in which women talked about what they wanted as far as suffrage, property, and education. Alright, so now we move into period 5, which is from 1844 to 1877. This is going to deal with the Civil War period and Reconstruction. Okay, so it's going to be the events that are going to lead to the Civil War, the components of it, and then what comes after it. So be able to tie all these events into this time period and be able to identify the turning points that happen within this time period as well. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to deal with in this period is the concept of manifest destiny, which is where a large portion of the population in America believed that it was our God-given destiny to expand to the west, to take over lands, and basically just tie in the entire continent of North America. So the first aspect is it deals with the right to expand, and then out of that, the first two things are Texas and Oregon and acquiring those territories and turning them into states. One of the big things that comes out of this concept of manifest destiny is the Mexican War, which happens when we come into conflict as we attempt to acquire and influence lands that are under Mexican control. The bottom line on the Mexican War is that we end up with a lot of territory out of it. Now, the war initially starts because of conflicts in Texas, and President McKinley at the time, or I'm sorry, President Polk at the time, is able to justify this war by saying the conflict in Texas is the equivalent of American blood on American soil. So he's able to rally public support for this by the fact that he's tying in the people of Texas as being Americans, even though they technically aren't yet. As we fight this war, you obviously have those people who are for it and for the territorial expansion. You also, on the other side of it, have the Whig Party that we talked about with Andrew Jackson that are opposed to it because they believe that the sole motivation of this expansion is to pick up more territory for slave owners, to expand slavery states, if you will. So we fight the war as far as the battles. Once again, don't really need to know a whole lot about that, so I'm going to deal more with the consequences. And the consequences come from the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, in which we pick up the lands that eventually become the states that you see here. As we do that, the two big ones are California and what is known as the Territory of New Mexico, which those states come a part of, and a recognition of the Rio Grande as the southern border of the United States. Now, out of this comes the question of what are we going to do with these states? Are they going to be slave-holding states or non-slave states? And a way to settle this that was proposed but did not pass, that is the key word of it, did not pass, is the Wilmot Proviso, which called for the prohibition of slavery in lands acquired from the Mexican-American War. So the proviso said that we could not have any slavery in these states. Now, it didn't pass. It was used more as a symbolic gesture or a symbolic symbol of the issue of what we're going to do with these states with regards to slavery. Okay, so we're going to roll from the beginnings of the conflict between the North and the South over slavery to some of the efforts of Northerners to get rid of slavery in the form of abolition. Now, the factors that lead into abolition, part of it is going to be the rapid and just crazy expansion of cotton in the South, and that's going to be because of a couple of features, a couple of factors. Number one is going to be the invention of the cotton gin by Eli Whitney, which allowed cotton to be produced for sale more quickly, more easily, and a lot more cheaply. And what happened because of that is a lot of people began to plant more land in cotton, which required more labor, which came in the form of slaves. So the cotton gin can be tied directly to the expansion of slavery in the South. New farmland and well, new farmland that comes about because of our territory expansion also leads to a rise in slavery and the rise of what's called king cotton, and also the rise of textiles. The fact that cotton clothing becomes more popular both in the United States and worldwide due to population increases and all kinds of stuff. But the bottom line is you've got to have more cotton to produce these, so there's a demand for the product, which means cotton producers are getting more money for their products. So they're going to try to produce more, and once again, to produce more, you need more labor, which equals more slaves. So as far as the characteristic of antebellum slavery, I guess I should say that antebellum means between the wars. So we're talking about the time period between the War of 1812 and the Civil War. As far as slavery during this time period, one of the big things is there is a network of social relations and connections going through slave society. So there is some word getting back and forth about the treatment of slaves, ways to escape to the north, and things like that. Our slave population at this time is very self-sustaining. So the slave trade had been outlawed years before this time period that we're looking at, but we were still able, the United States was still able to, particularly the South, was still able to rely on slave labor because of natural reproduction. Slaves kept having more and more children, so there wasn't really a need to import slaves even if they could. And also, slaves were becoming very adept at resisting the work that was required of them. Outside of some isolated rebellions like the Stono Rebellion or Nat Turner, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, there wasn't a lot of just outright reaction to slavery. It was more subtle. It was things like faking illnesses so you couldn't work. It was working more slowly than you normally do. And it was also breaking a tool so you couldn't get the job done. So slaves were kind of, showing their resistance to the slave trade by doing these things. Okay, so now we move forward to some of the ways in which Northerners were trying to abolish slavery with the abolitionist movement. And the first thing you need to be aware of is the American Colonization Society, which was formed in 1817 with the sole express purpose of returning freed slaves to Africa. Now, one of the names you may see associated with this is Henry Clay, who we talked about originally with the American system. He was one of the early proponents of this colonization society and kind of gave a mark of respectability to it. Another abolitionist you need to be aware of is William Lloyd Garrison, who was in charge of the publication of an abolitionist newspaper known as the Liberator. Very inflammatory, took a not so peaceful slant on getting rid of slavery. What they did is they published articles. The entire content of the newspaper was associated with and was pushing forward the idea of abolition. You also need to be aware that there were not only white abolitionists, there were also African American. The best known at this time, or one of the best known at this time, being Frederick Douglass, who was the most prominent, as it says, black abolitionist. And also tying into the last period with the tie-in or the connections between the women's movement and abolition, a woman named Sarah Grimke was very important in some of her writings and public appearances with regards to tying together abolition and women's rights. So we have all these arguments between North and South, and tensions are rising, and it's looking like war is going to happen at some point. So as a way to kind of avoid it, or at least delay it, which is actually what it did, it just delayed the Civil War, out of some of these conflicts between what to do with slave states and non-slave states comes the Compromise of 1850, which is yet another example of how we used compromise to settle problems back in the first half of this country's history. As the Compromise of 1850 comes out, some of the provisions of it, and it all once again boils down to admitting states as free or slave holding. So you need to be aware of the provisions of this. Number one, it's an admission of California as a free state. So after the Mexican-American War, we pick up California. We got to figure out whether it's going to be slave or not. It comes in as a free state. Also, you have the abolition of the slave trade in the District of Columbia. Now, we're not talking about the international slave trade. We're talking about the forced migration of slaves or the sale of slaves within the United States. And then the passage of a more stringent Fugitive Slave Act, which was really the key point of conflict for Southerners, the key conflict for Northerners in the fact that, how do I want to word it? It made it more to where it put penalties on Northerners for hiding freed slaves is what it was. We're in the midst of the Underground Railroad and all this stuff, and some Northerners were helping these guys integrate themselves into Northern society, find family connections, find some kind of work, just get them into society. Well, the Fugitive Slave Act made it illegal, or made it more illegal for them to do that by putting penalties, fines, jail time, stuff like that. So that's what really riled up the North about this compromise. So as we move forward and conflicts and tensions become higher, and we still got states coming into the Union, Congress basically decides to kind of wash its hands of it, to eliminate them as a problem in this process. And they do this through the concept of what's called popular sovereignty, which basically means they're going to put it in the hands of the people. If a territory applies for statehood, no longer will Congress decide whether a state is going to be slave or not. They're going to let the people vote to decide whether they want to come in as a slave state where slavery is allowed, or one in which there is no slavery. And what it did, like, people liked it for a variety of reasons. Congress liked it because the blame could not be put on them, no matter which way the decision went. And the people liked it of a territory. The people of a territory liked it because they felt like they had a say in what was going to happen. Now the conflicts come with how rowdy, I guess you could say, the minority is going to be once the decision is made. And the key testing ground for this is going to be Kansas. So the test of this, excuse me, of popular sovereignty comes with the Kansas-Nebraska Act, in which the territory come in and applied in two states, Kansas and Nebraska. And the question comes up again: what is going to happen? Are these states going to be slaveholding or not? And what ends up happening out of this act, which is advocated by Stephen Douglas, who becomes Lincoln's opponent in the election of 1860, is what to do. Okay, and what ends up happening is Nebraska, the territory of Nebraska, gets split up into two states, Kansas and Nebraska, and they decide to do the slave status by popular sovereignty. Now there is a problem with this and the consequences of it, and the fact that previously, with the Compromise of 1820, it was stated that, or 1820, it was stated there would be no slavery above that 3830 line. Well, if you look at the map, the territory of Nebraska is above that line, so it should not be slaveholding at all. Well, by saying you can use popular sovereignty, you're kind of undermining that, and you're basically informally repealing that compromise. You're saying it no longer applies. And also, from the point of view of Northern abolitionists, this goes against everything they're standing for as well, and what was proposed, or what was put in stone in the Compromise of the Missouri Compromise of 1820 and the Compromise of 1850 to a certain extent, in the fact that slavery was going to continue to be advocated and there was a potential expansion of slavery. So this act, while once again kind of delaying war through the concept of popular sovereignty, really didn't solve anything. It just delayed the inevitable for a little bit. Okay, now we move forward to another event on the road to the Civil War, which is the Dred Scott case. Now what this boils down to is Dred Scott was a slave who was accompanying his master. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head what state it was, but they go to a state in which there is no slavery. Now while they're there, his master dies. So Dred Scott assumes that since he is in a non-slaveholding state, that he is free. Well, what happens is court case goes to the Supreme Court, where they rule that number one, he was a slave and couldn't even sue in federal court anyway because he wasn't considered a citizen. And number two, slaves were considered to be private property. So therefore, they could be taken into any territory and they would still be considered a slave, whether it was slaveholding or free. And then slaves could not be taken from their masters, regardless of where they were. So the kind of the quote unquote from the review book says, once a slave, always a slave. So just because his master died doesn't mean he was free. So once again, the consequences, which are a lot of times the most important, it invalidates the Missouri Compromise of 1820 as well as the Northwest Ordinance, which was earlier in the book. It becomes a major issue in debates going forward, particularly the Lincoln-Douglas debates leading up to the election of 1860, and then it just continues to widen the gap between the North and the South. Everything that we've talked about up to this point in this period is furthering the divide between them to the point where they can't be reconciled and war breaks out. All right, so that's going to wrap up this portion of Period 5. And the next one we will continue on with John Brown and getting into the Civil War.